Requiem aeterna.
Hey there, this is Brent.
And this is Amanda.
We are the Unreliable Narrators.
Here to talk about the strangeness, the mystery, and the wonder of Gene Wolfe's prose.
What is time?
What is memory?
What is a person?
Is this reality?
Where are we?
Do we exist?
Have you ever considered that all your choices are of what brought you right here to this very moment?
Episode number 23, as we continue with Bibliomen, 20 characters waiting for a book. First published in Cheap Street, limited edition in 1984, and then republished in an expanded version by Broken Mirrors Press, October 1995.
Well, Amanda, I've said a few things in previous episodes because I hadn't read through the entire section. This number 12 here is cracking me up because I had made comments about peace and I was like, oh, this is kind of reminding me about peace.
Yes.
And I was approaching Bibliomen as though I was doing a first read and I would read the sections that we had, read through them multiple times, but I have not been reading ahead.
Yes, and perhaps that was not the best choice that we could have made, because I've been doing the same thing, reading in preparation for each episode, but not reading ahead. I haven't read the entirety of the collection, and now I'm beginning to think we should have done that.
Yeah.
I believe someone once said, you never read a Wolfe story, you only reread a Wolfe story, and we should have read the entire collection. Anyway, we messed it up, guys. We're going to go back and re-record everything from the very beginning. I'm kidding. No, we're not.
I think chapter 12, so far, this is one of the gems.
Yes, Lieutenant James Ryan O'Murphy, NYPD.
Born May 8th, 1931, New York City.
Accepted as a cadet by the New York Police Department in 1959. Transferred to the Biblioclepsy and Plagiarism Squad, 1970. Promoted to the head of that squad, 1976. The following interview with Lieutenant O'Murphy appeared in the New York Daily News for February 31st, 1988. How many times did you read it before that February 31st jumped out at you?
It jumped out at me the first time, but I glossed over it.
Yeah.
And I made a mental note because part of what I was thinking about, so home fires, they talk about a 500-day calendar year.
Yes.
And yet there's still an office Christmas party. So I tucked that in the back of my head. Either we're in an alternative timeline or this is the future. I didn't really.
Yeah, I think I have probably too much lowered defenses. You read enough speculative fiction and you're like, oh yeah, sure, you can travel faster than light. Oh yeah, sure, you can communicate instantaneously. Oh yeah, sure. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, you can have a third arm. It's just a clever surgery. Oh yeah, February can have 31 days.
Yeah, I guess this comes up later.
It does. It does. Yeah, so this one's a little bit of a longer selection than some of the other Bibliomen episodes. And it is in the form of an extended interview between the Daily News and Lieutenant O'Murphy. Starts off seemingly quite innocently. Just what does your squad do? We investigate all crime primarily concerned with books.
Does that include bookies?
That felt like such a weak, question. Ha ha ha. No, that's gambling. We're talking about stealing books, stealing material from books, and forging books.
Yeah, I do like how it's stealing books, stealing material from books, and forging books. It has nothing to do with copyright.
No.
Yeah, because that's civil, not criminal.
Yes.
I felt like that was a little nod there.
Yeah, and from the beginning, this is a kind of story that I'm going to enjoy. Stories about book theft, book finding, all of these things. Definitely things that I enjoy. I have Nicholas Basbane's A Gentle Madness that talks about obsessive collectors, including the guy that stole books from libraries And as a collector, I feel like you're never more than a half a step away from being a bibliothief at any moment because, the hunger.
Yeah. So Daily News, the Hitler Diaries, that sort of thing?
Yes. And here Wolfe brings up an actual book forgery scenario.
Yeah. So this was a real thing.
Yes.
The Hitler Diaries, 62 volumes forged by Conrad. It's German, Kujau.
We'll just call him Conrad.
Okay, that's easier.
Yeah.
And sold for millions in 1983.
Yeah. And 62 volumes. That's an extensive project.
And he did those volumes over the course of like a couple months. Everybody was so excited that they had found these volumes that they fast-tracked authentication. And so they quickly showed them to people. It was like, does this look authentic? And they're like, well, yeah, kind of. And the people that authenticated them, their careers suffered after the fact. But one of the things when they actually did analysis on them,
right,
some of the pages were glowing under infrared light. They used materials. It was polyester was found in the bindings.
Right.
And then there was the font was different. And when Conrad was foraging the font for Hitler's signature, he misinterpreted what the old German lettering system.
Right. So a number of tells, including the one, I'm not sure if it's mentioned in the story or not, but that the notebooks are not even from the historical era, from Hitler's time. The notebooks are a later manufacture.
He bought those traveling over to East Germany, and he thought they looked old. So there was some black ribbon, and he grew up in the Nazi youth.
Yeah, and that should be on the record here. This is a guy who had more than one tie to the actual Nazi regime.
And so he had actual, like an SS seal and an emblem. And so he worked the black ribbons and then put authentic
seals
on it. So when people saw those, it was like, oh, yeah, that part looks authentic. So
right.
It's a crazy story if you want to go down a rabbit hole because he was captured. There was a guy that was brokering the deal. That guy was skimming off millions because he was telling Conrad that, oh, well, they don't want to pay. But then he was turning around and telling the publishers that, oh, this is going to be more expensive because we got to smuggle these out of East Germany.
Right.
Conrad had also been forging water paintings by Hitler.
Not just his handwriting, but also his art.
He kind of was a minor celebrity after he got out of jail because he started selling authentic forgeries.
Right. So that the forgeries themselves became collectible.
I can see why Wolfe was interested in this because the forgeries became so collectible that then a forgery ring out of, and I can't remember if it's Hong Kong or Taiwan, they started forging his forgeries and selling them as authentic. I mean, you can already see like why Wolfe would.
Yeah, we've got a nesting doll here of complexity. This is definitely a Wolfian labyrinth, even though it really happened.
Yeah. Hitler Diaries, this was a real thing.
Yep. So Lieutenant O'Murphy is like, oh, yeah, but people who were trying to sell them here didn't know they were fakes. That's not a crime under our jurisdiction. So we didn't worry about that. And then the Daily News moves on to talk about another forger. I understand there's a notorious book forger here in the U.S., Louis Gold.
And this is where we tie back to peace. And, well, I'll just go on. That's right. But he never comes to New York, so we can't touch him personally. He operates out of Ohio. We pick up something of his every few years. And then Daily News. Can you tell our readers a little about him?
Oh, yes. And here's the reference earlier. Certainly, Gold is a very high-class operator. If I may speak frankly, it's a pleasure to go after a crook like that. A class act. He fakes only books that don't exist or that nobody has a copy of, so you can't compare his fake to any original. Then, too, his materials are always right. You mentioned the Hitler Diaries. The forger used notebooks that didn't exist when Hitler was alive. Gold would never have done that.
This is another part. There's the admiration
Yes.
that the detective has for the forger. And so you stopped a little short here, but he goes on and it says that hardly matters since it would have been as good as the original material and maybe better and more characteristic. The way I read that there is Gold is so good and his craft is so honed that there's shades of the Chesterton Man Who Is Thursday.
Yes.
Where there's the guy who's pretending that he's the other older gentleman. And he pretends to be that older gentleman so well that when they both are at a party, they think that the real man is the fake.
Yes.
So it's like he's faking this so well that the material that Hitler supposedly wrote, he would have made it better than Hitler's actual diaries.
Right.
And that part, that cracks me up.
Yes. There's a nice fold there.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and then the Daily News. And this is, to me, this is maybe the heart of Bibliomen. It's definitely the heart of this story.
Yeah.
This turn right here. Can you give our book collecting readers some tips on identifying Gold's material? All I can suggest is that they check the minute details, things Gold might have inserted as private jokes. This interview is dated February 31st, for example.
And here I think we have another linchpin of the entire Gene Wolfe extended universe.
Yes.
We can substitute Wolfe for Gold.
Oh, for sure. Gold is Wolfe, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like this one just dovetails nicely with our very first episode where it's all the in-jokes and the folds and the wordplay. And so with Dumpster World.
The sense you get here is that everything you've been reading in this volume is a forgery of something. So this is some book forger's work, which means that Gene Wolfe sat down and wrote a book as a book forger. And then he wrote in that book that he wrote as a book forger that all of Gold's work is a forgery that's as good as it could have been if an actual author had done it. And so we live in his made-up world. And he also just tells us right here, this is how you read my work. Look for the minute details. These are private jokes, and they're deliberate, and they give you clues.
I think you summarized it very well there.
Well, yeah, I just felt like the center of this story, it broke or cracked in some way that was like, this was deliberately constructed to break right here, and now you have something new. I don't know, like a perforated edge or something like, oh, I was supposed to fold it here. And now I can see the whole picture. The edges now line up.
Yeah. So we go on and it says, the Daily News asks, what other instances of passing off fiction as fact? That movie...
I don't know, Zelig?
Is it Zelig or Zelig?
Yeah.
That's a Woody Allen mockumentary movie. And that's about a man. He has, I'm not sure if you'd say he has like a lot of empathy, but essentially he can mirror any situation that he's in, kind of a con man. And so like he's at a really ritzy party and he can mirror the expectations so well that they assume he's a rich person. Then he goes back and he's amongst the kitchen staff and he's just as crude and vulgar as them. And they just assume he's working class. I think there's a bit of where Wolf's pulling that in. Like you kind of have to be smart and have empathy.
Yes.
To portray and embody these different characters that he's created.
Yeah. So reference here to that mockumentary and then a nesting reference to his own work. Or Professor Arthur's Capers. Now, longtime listeners will remember Professor Arthur from an earlier episode of Bibliomen.
Yeah, it starts getting so recursive here. I have a draft graph of how these different sections tie back into each other.
Is this where you look like the meme of the guy with the red string and the pictures and pointing at the board? And this is all connected?
Yeah. I don't have a good way of laying it out yet.
Once Unreliable Brent does have a good way of laying it out, we'll take a photograph and then we'll turn it into a meme. Yes, I don't know how you would map how all of these things fold together because, of course, Professor Arthur is the one who built an academic career commenting on the work of a made-up author, whose work he then also wrote.
Yes, so he's Bibliomen number 1, and so we covered him in the first episode. And then John Glaskin, he's Bibliomen number 7.
And he's the made-up author.
Yeah, and the one that traveled with Hemingway and all the...
Yes. And now here we are finding out that Arthur's is made up by a forger who does such a good job that it's as good as if it was really written by an author, but there's a clever detail inserted. And now I'm afraid we missed something in Glaskin and in Arthur's Bibliomen episodes. And there are new layers of mystery waiting for the next, I don't know, the top 6 Wolfe podcast to come in and analyze and define.
I'm worrying about that too.
Okay.
But onward we go.
Yes, we go.
So the answer, movies don't come under me. That's another squad. I love the fact that, oh yeah, of course we have a movie squad.
Yeah.
And then the Arthur's, he's fled the country and they're trying to get him extradited.
Yeah, Cambridge police are trying to have him extradited. If they succeed, we'll be interested.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Daily News is, well, I can see some of your cases must present a real intellectual challenge, much like reading Wolfe.
The toughest in the department.
Yeah. In mystery novels, the detective often has a friend who acts as a sounding board and sometimes offers suggestions. Do you, a real detective, have anybody like that?
As a matter of fact, I do. When I get a day off during a really tough case, I drive up to Massachusetts to talk to my uncle. He's a priest, retired now.
And that helps?
Pretty often it does. Of course, I always tell him it's really the thinking time that I have to drive up and back. I wouldn't want him to get above himself. Chuckles.
Yeah, so when I read that, I felt like that was just Wolfe nodding to Father Brown, Chesterton's Father Brown, because, of course, Father Brown is a priest and he solves mysteries. And so here, Lieutenant O'Murphy, who, by the way, is made up by notorious forger Lewis Gold, is also finding a priest to help him solve mysteries.
Yeah, I thought that, wasn't it Monsignor Murphy back in Smoot Friarly?
Oh, yeah, I think that is.
Yeah, so I think a minor character in Bibliomen 5.
Get out the red string.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a minor character that is now showing up in a second.
Yeah, the Monsignor that helped Sister Mary Beatrice join the convent.
I think you're right, though, about the Father Brown influence there.
It just felt like a tip of the hat
to
me. Yeah. Yeah, and then the Daily News wants to know, can you tell our readers something about a case you're working on now? And Lieutenant O'Murphy, I'd be glad to. Perhaps one of them can help. Right now, we're working on the French grave robbery.
Grave robbing?
Yeah. How would grave robbing have anything to do with books? Oh, I don't know. Maybe we just need to turn back a few pages to look at French, another Biblioman.
Yeah, Bibliomen number 4.
Yes.
An editor named Bernard French was buried in one of his own books a couple of years ago. The title is The Great Lost Art of Western Europe, by the way. Most of the copies were pulped, and the book is quite valuable now. 3 weeks ago, at least 2 persons broke into the 56th Street Cemetery and opened the grave.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, anyone with information concerning the crime should call headquarters and ask for me.
Yeah, so here we have grave robbing. That never occurs in a Wolfe story in any other case. And this is Bernard French, who made that giant coffee table book, that huge book, that then he died because he fell into it and he was pressed like a flower. And then he was buried in the book as his coffin.
Yep. There was a dinosaur folio.
Dinosaur folio, yep.
So then the Daily News makes a...
Oh, yep. We have a pun here.
Uh-huh. French is checked out?
And then Lieutenant O'Murphy, ha-ha.
Wouldn't a book big enough to bury a man in be difficult to dispose of?
Well, and let's not forget the fact that there's a corpse in this one. Whatever the verbal imagery of a person pressed between the pages is, it's not quite I mean, I don't know how big this book is, but it's not quite like pressing a leaf, is it?
No.
Oh, man. And then Lieutenant O'Murphy, we doubt that they're going to try to sell it uncut. It's too well known. They're probably planning to send it to Amsterdam, where the plates will be taken, and so forth. So it's going to be cut up like a manuscript and sold off for individual pages.
Yeah.
And that's the end of the interview. Thank you, Lieutenant O'Murphy.
Yeah, so this one, my original thought was I wish that they would have collected this one in the new Wolf at the Door.
Yeah.
But it's so intertwined with the other Bibliomen stories that I don't think they could have done that.
Well, and it certainly does call into question, your impression of, Gene Wolfe's introduction gives the indication that, these are just a bunch of loose character sketches that I don't have a story for. No, this is a coherent, connected story. You just have to unfold it enough.
I think I enjoyed this one. It's definitely up there with Smoot Friarly and the Intelligent Car.
Yes. For best Bibliomen so far.
Yeah, so far those are my top 3.
I think I can agree with that ranking. This one was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not the only one we're going to discuss this episode, though. We have another story. This one is about Anne Parsons.
Yeah, so Bibliomen number 13.
Lucky 13.
Yeah. Born November 7th, 1935 in Kansas City, Missouri. Graduated 1955, Missouri State U.
Which this mapping that you're planning on doing with all of these Bibliomen, like we get all of these birth dates and universities, and I feel like there's just a wealth of detail hidden in who went to college with whom, who was born in the same place or near the same place. I don't know. Probably you draw this all out on a map and it spells out wolf or something. Or maybe it's the drawing of a wolf if you connect the dots correctly.
Oh, man. You know what? That's an exercise for a listener.
If somebody wants to produce some fan art, we will support you.
So in 1955, so the year she graduated, Parsons accepted a position at the Kansas City Learning Resource Center.
Then known as the Kansas City Public Library. Interesting, huh?
Yeah, slight renaming there.
Yes.
She spent almost her entire career there, well-liked, though not well-known by the rest of the staff.
One of the fast tracks to being well-liked is to be not very well-known.
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
Okay.
3 years before her scheduled retirement, she was promoted to rank of assistant librarian. In that position, she was charged with the expansion of the videotape section of the audio-visual department.
Yeah. And her superiors were horrified to find that her plan required the construction of a new building, a block from the present Learning Resource Center, that would house the entire non-educational and anti-educational categories.
So, Amanda, what do you think an anti-educational category is?
I don't know. I could name some books and authors if you want. That'll just get me in trouble with fandoms, though.
Well, yeah. But no, this is hilarious. So it's like the Learning Resource Center has non-educational and anti-educational items.
Yes, well, and anti-educational is almost, I think, easier to understand than non-educational. What is a non-educational resource?
Yeah.
I mean, a pile of dead leaves is educational if you pay enough attention to it.
Okay, you got me there.
Okay.
But I like the fact that she's like, well, no, let's call it like it is and just build a new building and not pretend like this should be part of the library.
Yeah, and this connects to something we've said in a previous episode about frustration with libraries changing into essentially computer labs. Yeah, I'm with her there. Her plan gets discarded, though, and a new plan instituted that would utilize existing Learning Resource Center space. Parsons' protest that the new plan involved the elimination of the Resource Center's last collection of books was dismissed with gentle ridicule. Again, I am so on Team Anne Parsons here.
Yeah, I am not even sympathetic towards the library.
Not even a little bit. I'm sorry, don't you mean the Learning Resource Center?
Ideal.
Oh, okay.
Rebranding. That's everything. So a plan was put into effect, and the books were offered to the public at the price of 10 cents each.
Yeah, the ultimate library book sale. They're going to get rid of their final book collection at 10 cents a book.
And then it was that Parsons rose to public attention, astonishing not only her colleagues, but the entire city. Drawing upon her life savings, she bought the entire 14,000 volumes and moved them into the abandoned building that had hoped to replace with her videotape annex.
Yeah, so that was basically $1,400 worth of books. And she basically just makes a new library.
Yeah, so this is the original little tiny lending library.
Yes, little free library.
Yeah, except it's a warehouse.
Yes.
And so she has a sign out front, if the book has helped you, please give, but no charges were made.
Yes. People can just come and take a book. Initially, all went well. Few visitors visited the storefront facility, and Parsons was able to relax and even read a little, as she said, while carrying out her duties. I actually love this because that's the dream of owning a bookstore, is that it would be slow, busy enough to pay the bills, but slow enough that you can get some reading done.
Yeah.
Well, let's just say I did get some reading done in the the first year I owned the bookstore, and then got almost no reading done after that, and also lost money. So it didn't work out so well for me.
This next section pivots into, I view this as a social commentary on the continuation of the non-educational and anti-educational. These are people that are using the book collection as political means instead of...
Yeah, this feels a little odd, but yeah, an extension of that. Representatives of the city's Black community demanded that she include books by and about Blacks. She pointed out Shakespeare's Othello and the collected works of Samuel R. Delany. Good to know that when Wolfe wrote this, Samuel R. Delany was the one Black speculative fiction author that people could name. I think, most people are up to 2 now, Delany and Butler.
Yeah, I was going to say Octavia Butler.
Yeah. You can have a much longer list, but those are the 2 that for sure people are going to know.
Yeah. And then we get the Hispanic protests were quieted when she appeared on the 6 o'clock news to show a copy of Don Quixote and explain what it was.
Which I love that it has to be explained because it is an odd book.
Yeah.
Classic or not.
Yeah. But then you just get this sense of people are protesting, but they haven't even bothered to familiarize themselves with the actual issues.
And this was a volunteer and out of her own funds salvaging the last few books that the library had kind of situation. But it's also the kind of thing that could definitely get you in trouble with people because you somehow fail to do the good deed in precisely the right way.
Yeah. So then some obscene pictures spray painted on her windows won her some public sympathy, as did several attempts to firebomb her building.
Yes, that escalated quickly. Sorry, this is just a personal anecdote, and so maybe you can cut this out later, but the trying to do a good thing and then people getting mad at you for not doing it the right way.
Yeah, let's hear.
When I had a bookstore and a coffee shop, and we had a website and a blog, because this was way back in the dark ages when blogs were still popular. And I posted about buying a bike rack and getting it installed in front of our building because we didn't have any bike parking. The landlord didn't provide any bike parking.
Okay, this seems fairly straightforward.
I think so. Somebody angrily commented on the blog post that we were careless and selfish because we didn't commission a local artist to sculpt us a custom bike rack. Things like this could be used to bring a community together. And why weren't we making the effort to bring the community together? Now, keep in mind, I lost approximately 10 cents an hour for every hour I worked on running my bookstore. I did the math one day. It was very depressing. So I spent 10 cents an hour in order to be able to try and run a bookstore for 3 years. And this guy's mad at me because I just bought it was a very basic bike rack and bolted it out front instead of, I don't know, starting a community art competition for a metal sculpture that you probably wouldn't even be able to, lock your bike to anyway. I don't know. It was a very odd moment. I'm still just puzzled and annoyed, and couldn't you just have supported my bookstore a little bit more?
And now your moment of revenge is here.
Now I'm talking about him on a podcast that 14 people listen to.
You want to name names or?
Oh, I have no idea who it was.
Oh, okay.
Or do I?
Is that a Patreon bonus episode? Like names
Sure,
will be
yes,
named.
names will be named. We will name the books that are in the non-educational and anti-educational section, and we will name the names of people that annoyed us in the past. So, or I say us, me. I don't know if anyone's ever annoyed you. This may be an Amanda-only exclusive. All right. Yes, firebomb her building. That escalated quickly.
Yeah. It was not to last. The number of viewers increased, and a brutal street gang, Arthur's Pages.
Wait, who?
Arthur.
Arthur's Pages.
Uh-huh.
Yes, this is so... Yes.
Yeah, so now we're back to our previous...
Professor Arthur, and it's Arthur's Pages, right? Get it? Get it?
Yeah, so it's spelled like a page in a book.
Yes, and it could also be like a page of a knight.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So Arthur's Pages appeared to protect them.
Yes, and when the body of George Bug Ribberts, a convicted rapist, was discovered with a scrap of paper bearing the words, "Who kills a man kills a reasonable creature," in its mouth, it was suspected they were from some book, but Parsons refused to explain. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, suspected it was from some book.
Huh, is this from some book, Brent?
It is. It's from Milton. The quote is, "Who kills a man kills a reasonable creature, God's image, but thee who destroys a good book kills reason itself." I'm not even sure how to tease this one apart, because if they pulled the page out of the book,
Then they destroyed it.
then they destroyed it over the "to kill the rapist." And it's like the reverse of what Milton is saying.
I don't know. It's so recursive here. I'm not sure that it isn't just ironic. Who kills a man kills a reasonable creature. But this is not a man, because the language here is great here. Wolfe uses his pronouns carefully. In its mouth. So George Bug Ribberts, a convicted rapist, was discovered, etc., bearing the words, "Who kills a man kills a reasonable creature," in its mouth. He's not a man.
Yeah.
He's an it.
Now, all of a sudden, I want to bring this section into the endless Reddit posts about Jolenta.
Oh my goodness, yes! Okay, the next time someone asks, does anyone think it's bad that Severian raped Jolenta? Or next time someone asks, I can't read a book that has a meaningless rape in it.
Yeah, well, now we have a meaningless murder of a rapist.
Yes, who has now been called an it, dehumanized.
Yeah. The next sentence, her request for public funding was subsequently denied. The funny thing is this is the end of the paragraph about killing the convicted rapist.
Yes, what are we appealing to public funding for?
I have no clue, but I just thought it was funny that it was tied in with that.
Yes. And at present, her operation is nearly overwhelmed. Most of the original collection is gone, and experts agree that her intention of purchasing an additional 50,000 volumes with the money she has collected will only exacerbate her difficulties.
On one hand, it's like, oh yeah, these are difficulties. But on the other hand, she's distributed thousands and thousands of books into the community.
And apparently raised funds sufficient on her own without public funding to buy another 50,000.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So now she's attempting to train a recent graduate in learning resource science, which this is just hilarious to me because a librarian, an actual librarian, has a degree in library sciences, but this is learning resource science to assist her. But when asked about this, she would only say, shh. And that's the end of that story.
Yeah. I really liked this one.
What do you like about it?
I like that it sums up many of my complaints with the public library system.
Have you had any recent frustrations with the public library system, Brent?
Yes. The other day, I tried to get a early Virginia kid journal. It was her journal about poetry, ran for 3 issues in 69 to 70. I tracked down all the information that was available. I put in an interlibrary loan request. I should mention that it's in 3 libraries in the U.S. None of these are indexed.
Yeah, it's not like there's anything readily available. It's just, okay, they have these titles in their collections.
Mm-hmm. And this is like the first volume, so I think there's 12 pages in it. I got an email back that it's like, oh, we're going to need to know the title of the section you want photocopied and the page numbers. And
it could cost you up to $20.
And it's like, I have to know what I want, and they won't provide me with any information about what's in it. It is so frustrating. It feels like this recursive loop that goes nowhere.
And it's a 12-page pamphlet. And so photocopying it could take no time at all. And my goodness, you're a library. Scan it and upload it to a database somewhere, and then all future requests will be expedited.
Uh-huh.
Nobody's been interested before. Okay, well, now we just bump this to the top of the task list. You can have an intern do it. It'll take no time at all.
Well, and the frustrating thing is if I could travel there and get into the special collections room with my cell phone, I could get a working copy of it within like a minute.
Yes.
Snap the page, turn the page, snap the page.
It takes almost no time at all.
Yeah. So I love the idea of the public library. And perhaps this is a commentary on the burning of the Library of Alexandria.
Okay.
Well, I was going to say, we lament all the works we lost in that burning. Here's the thing. Maybe they got rid of all the books and maybe it was turned into something else. By the time the Library of Alexandria was burned, it may not even have been a library with books in it. It could have
been a floor show.
It could have. For all I know, they pissed off some guy that's like, hey, I need this scroll from Babylon. And they're like, we're going to need to know which papyrus sheet that it's on and what you're looking for in line numbers.
And by the way, we don't care. We don't have time for this. We're much more into something else. I was just reading a Cory Doctorow book, and the book is about information technology and copyright.
Okay.
And the way that copyright law is not keeping up with technological development. And even the name copyright is sort of out of step with where we are, because at one point making copies was the choke point for spread of information. So copyright law regulated the production and sale of intellectual property in a reasonable way. Making copies is the easiest thing in the world now. And even if you were going to do it in what seems like the most low-tech way, sit and type out a typescript of a published work, you could be done in less than a day for most things.
Yeah, in comparison to sitting as a scribe in the Middle Ages.
Exactly.
Hand copying.
Yeah. He's talking about how the copying technology is so far ahead that we just have to think about these things in a different way. And we have to think about access to them in a different way. So yeah, it's like we love libraries, we love books, but books and bookstores and libraries are riding on the reverence that we give books because we have a sense of reverence towards books, as I think we should.
Yeah.
But the entire industry is abusing that sense of reverence. And so when the gigantic website that shall not be named does something like remotely delete copies of George Orwell's 1984, we're upset about the intrusion of technology. And that upsetness is so tied to the reverence we have for books that we are not paying attention to the actual surveillance technologies. This is Cory Doctorow's argument. I'm butchering it. I apologize. You should actually just read his book. Information doesn't want to be free. But all of that rambling to say that I think much like the publishing industry And much like the US government and copyright law and international treaties and copyright law and the ways that this gets all tangled up in our minds, it's the same thing that's happening with libraries. We have this reverence for libraries, but then when they're not acting as libraries, they're not acting as repositories and facilitators of books, then they're abusing that reverence. And again, we said this, I think, last episode. It's not that libraries aren't doing good work when they become essentially social services locations. It's just not library work.
Yeah.
So, rant over.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to our TED Talk.
Yes. And go read more books or something.
At least Cory Doctorow's book.
Well, his are pretty great.
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
Okay. All right. We have one last Biblioman for today. Adam, ? Poor ? Born 1951, ? Possibly on the Channel Island of Sark. All right, what's going on here?
This is a good question. Out of the three we're doing today, this one is the most obscure.
Yes.
To me. We have Adam Poor. This is, with the question marks, this is a fairly common thing with older works, usually not from 1975, when Poor's vocable.
I would pronounce it voices vocable because vocative, but yeah, voices vocable. So voices that can speak.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Okay.
Keep showing up for Brent mispronouncing more words.
That's okay. We don't want to take the rural Idaho out of your accent.
So there is an island in the Channel Islands, Sark. There's the only thing that I found possibly relevant there was, oh gosh, now I can't see my note. It's Peak Gormsest. What's the...
Oh, Gormangust?
Gormangust, yes.
Yes, yeah. Mervyn Peak.
Peak, yeah. So he's, if you frequent Reddit or any other online forums, he'll come up quite a bit.
In connection to Wolfe and as just a grandfather of the speculative fiction.
Yeah, and so there's some theories that possibly those books may take place on Sark. It's such a tangential, yet maybe connected.
Yeah, but I mean, Wolfe spoke well of Peak.
Yes.
And so some mild connection there. He would have had Sark in mind. Yeah, so Adam Poor, ? Abounding, has a book called Voices Vocable, and it's a novel of a new kind. So here we are in experimental fiction, consisting entirely of unattributed dialogue. Poor's 7 characters have boarded a train from Sark to Bournemouth. The train hurtles through its tunnel in total darkness. 3 are women, 3 are men, and 1, Robin Mink, is of indeterminate sex and maybe a child. They speak, and the reader comes to realize, and then the narrative goes on here to describe each of the individual characters' characteristics. And then our challenge is to determine which is which, to sort the characters out. So you have unattributed dialogue, and you're trying to identify the different characters and decide which one is which. And then the next sentence, it is possible that the tunnel linking Sark to Bournemouth has collapsed and they are in limbo, or that there is no tunnel. Okay.
Yeah. Parsing this description of his book is a critique that I have seen people make of, I don't know what you want to call it, but people group it as late stage Wolfe, which I think covers things after New Sun, or Earth of the New Sun at least, because Long Sun gets this critique where...
Or just complaint. People don't like it.
Yeah, that's probably a complaint. Where the characters are speaking, and there's often not dialogue tags that tell.
Yeah.
So you have to infer who's speaking based off of what they're talking about, or their point of view, or possibly turns of phrases that they have, or things that they're interested in.
Yeah, or just the sequence sometimes. If you have 2 characters, you have to just really pay attention to the sequence of dialogue switching.
Yeah. And then another thing people complain about with that is without the dialogue tags, you don't get, and he said angrily,
Right.
or he mocked, or she
Snorted,
derided him. You don't get the tone that the dialogue is in. So you have to read it and pay close attention to, wait, how is this interplay between these characters going on? So you need to have the entire history of their interaction in mind. And, oh, surprise, Wolfe doesn't always put their entire interactions on page. Sometimes the interaction happens in between a volume, or, we're with another character.
And sometimes you find out about it after you read this conversation. You find out about what they were talking about 6 chapters later, and then you're like, oh, or you don't notice until you reread.
Yeah, so I think it's funny that Adam Poor's novel here is very experimental, but the things that it's experimenting with are also some of Wolfe's interests that he tried to push in his fiction later.
Well, and this is where, so sometimes I don't know how to take people's questions or comments about Wolfe, because
let's hear this one.
He's described as a writer's writer, and I think that's an excellent description, not just because I wish to be a writer and I like to read Wolfe. So this isn't just a self-gratifying fantasy here, but it's because of stuff like this, where you read a Wolfe story, and very often one layer of the pleasure, I'm not going to say the pleasure of reading the Wolfe story, but one layer of the pleasure is figuring out that he is doing something very experimental. And you're still also being carried along in an interesting story. Like, you can just read Wolfe and enjoy the stories. You may not. It may not be your style. You may not connect with it, but there are very enjoyable stories. I love so many of them. They're delightful. Jolenta notwithstanding. If you are the kind of person who cares about it, if you are paying attention, if you want to understand something that you didn't understand the first time through, there are things like this where you're like, oh, he's doing something extremely experimental here, and it causes me to pay attention in a new way. And having read more than my fair share of postmodern fiction, there are lots of ways you can do this that are just not that enjoyable to read. And so you're reading a story and it's like you were told, okay, this is experimental and this is really interesting. You're like, okay, but the story doesn't catch me. I'm not saying that somebody doesn't enjoy it, but, or, I'm not being carried along by something. And yeah, Wolfe, you get swords and horses or some alien creature that we're calling a horse. And you get some interesting mystery story or adventure story or an Arthurian legend. And yet it's also this other extremely experimental thing at the same time. So anyway, I don't know if I would have liked Adam Poor's story, but if this is, hey, what I was doing in the long sun was actually really difficult and experimental and creative, and maybe notice that, I'm on board.
Yeah. So Poor's next book, published in 1976, was a detective story
called Assaulted Mine.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, so it's assaulted.
Yeah, to salt a mine is to put good ore in it to make it look like it will be a productive place.
Yeah. Or the verbal play on jokes here is the mine was attacked.
Yes.
So the dad jokes are never ending.
Yes.
And so the publisher stated, probably untruthfully, says the parenthetical, that it was an earlier work.
Yeah, produced now only because of the favorable reception given Voices Vocable. Okay, so here we have another novel, and it's come out because somehow the first one with the 7 characters in dialogue is successful. And it's about a man found murdered in a Washington, D.C. subway station. Okay, look, a detective story about some guy that was murdered.
Mm-hmm.
He is without identification. Wait, what? A detective is seduced and beaten and solves the crime. Whoa, how are those things connected? I don't know. A second detective appears who shows the solution to be false, clues having been planted and altered by the first detective, the one who was seduced, beaten, and solved the crime. Okay. A third detective who is in fact the attorney of the first detective, shows that the accusations made against the first are without foundation, he having been accused by the second to further his career. At the conclusion of the book, the reader realizes that the third detective is in fact the murderer, or rather that he is meant to be the murderer, the clues that implicate him having been planted by a fourth party, Poor himself. The author?
What? You read that, and once again, it's just twists in on itself, and then you have, your comment, the author. So is this one of those Wolfe tricks of the trade where he'll have a character named Gene?
Yes. There's always a Wolfe.
Uh-huh. So is there always a poor Adam in
I don't know.
Adam Poor's stories?
Yes. Let's not linger too long on the name Adam.
Yeah. I don't know if this is relevant or not, but they're Confederacy of the Dunces. So Neon Bible was later published just because Confederacy of the Dunces was. I'm not even.
Yeah. That's O'Toole, right? Duncan D. O'Toole.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and that is a thing that happens, right? And it's also Go Set a Watchman, because To Kill a Mockingbird was not actually Harper Lee's first novel. She wrote a story about grown-up Scout going back to her hometown and being disappointed that her father now seems to be supporting the racists and this isn't the man who raised her. And her editor was like, okay, well, let's actually hear the story about little girl Scout instead of grown-up Scout. And so the only reason Go Set a Watchman was published was because somehow somebody got control of Harper Lee's estate and cashed in, publishing the thing that Harper Lee never had publicly declared she never wanted published. So yeah, that's a pretty common thing. Oh, we have one successful book. Let's publish anything else the author's ever written.
That happens quite a bit.
And sometimes it's good when Christopher Tolkien is shepherding your legacy. And sometimes it's not good.
Was that a Walter Hooper reference?
Shh. We're not talking. Okay, well, Walter Hooper, I don't know. I think that Frank Herbert had a son.
Yeah, I don't know if that was a relevant parenthetical on my part. That was me injecting that possibly into the story. So attempts to locate Poor or even establish his existence have proved fruitless.
Records indicating his birth on Sark have been shown in an article in the National Enquirer to be forgeries. Oh, wait, forgeries?
Yeah, they're forgeries, but then it's National Enquirer, which I don't know if they're still around anymore. But the National Enquirer was essentially...
What, your parents' Facebook page?
It...
Not your parents specifically, but listeners' parents' Facebook page.
Yeah, well, essentially it was a print version of The Onion or the Babylon Bee.
Right.
It was comical articles that you were supposed to take as humorous, and yet people did
share them seriously.
Yeah, it reminds me of the little Christian kid that read the Harry Potter books and then he wanted to be a wizard and he didn't like Jesus anymore. That was forwarded around in the early, late 90s, early 2000s.
Yes.
And then it was tracked down. It was actually an Onion article, but people didn't realize it. So it's a forged
records of his birth. This final sentence, it made me almost throw... I have a scan piece of paper. I almost threw the piece of paper across the room because this is... I'll just read it for you. This final sentence. His publishers are said to be holding his royalties in trust, and it has been alleged that Prince Charles and Princess Diana are among them. Excuse me.
Well, sections of the Channel Islands they're under a different... I don't know, not being a member of the United Kingdom, I know that there's areas that are owned by the Crown, and something runs in my mind that several areas of the Channel Islands are
Crown holdings.
Yeah, so...
I know, but holding his royalties in trust?
I refuse to acknowledge your eye roll. What do you mean?
Well, Brent's playing dense today.
Yeah. Are you saying that Prince Charles and Princess Diana are also forgeries of Lewis?
That was actually what I was asserting the whole time.
Okay. This was a fun episode in terms of Bibliomen. I liked the first one with the detective the
Me
most.
too. Me too.
The other two, though, I found very enjoyable.
Yes. And I don't know if it was something that shifted in me with the Lieutenant O'Murphy interview where I was like, okay, another character. Okay, it's fine. Yeah, we're getting things a little complicated and layered. And then Wolfe was like, here's the key. And I was like, oh, duh. Okay. And then, so I don't know if that is what increased my enjoyment or if it is just that these are some fun characters.
I feel I'm done with this for now.
For now. All right. That's episode number 23. And the unreliable narrators are Amanda Patchen and Brent Towle. And as Gene Wolfe once said, you don't despise money, nor do I. Wealth is stuffy and stupid and arrogant, and the only good thing about it is that it has money. Money's lovely stuff.